Hey everybody, welcome to the CISO series video chat. My name is David Spark. I am your host and producer. Actually, I'm just your host. I keep making that mistake because I say producer for everything else. But actually, the gentleman who is the producer is Andrew Friels, who's in the background right now doing that. All right, let me just explain today's topic. It's hacking BYOD and unmanaged devices, an hour of critical thinking of all the devices we don't have agents on. Our guests today are Jerry Archer, SVP CISO for Sallie Mae, and Curtis Simpson, who's the CISO for Armis. And with that being said, thank you to Armis for sponsoring this very episode of the podcast. We greatly appreciate that. And just as a reminder, for those of you who are new to this video chat, we have 5 different ways you can participate. The chat room, which is very, very active. Submitting bad ideas, which all you have to do is type the word bad idea, and your bad idea. And essentially, your worst idea given the topic of hacking BYOD and unmanaged devices. If you would like to join us on video, just put in the, bring me on, and Andrew, the producer, will try to bring as many of you on as possible. You can ask any question, or vote for your favorite question as well. All right, the format for today, a slight tweak. We'll have questions in the first 20 minutes. At 20 minutes, we will put the poll up of the bad ideas. Poll will be live for those 10 minutes. You go ahead and you vote for your favorite bad idea. At 30 minutes past the hour, we'll play the Department of Yes. Then immediately after that, for another 10 minutes, vote for your favorite questions. We'll answer some more questions. At 45 minutes past the hour, we will play What's Worse. And Dutch Schwartz, who was last week's winner, will actually come on and read the 2 What's Worse comparison, which will be from your 2 bad ideas. And very last will be the last question and final advice. And then at the end of the hour, we will go into our icebreaker as well. Next, by the way, if none of you have been part of the icebreaker, let me just mention that at the end of the hour, the link at the bottom of the screen will change and you'll all go over there at the end of the hour. I will also mention that that it's a lot of fun if you've never done it before. So please join us for that. It's essentially cybersecurity speed dating. All right, next Friday, we will be having Hacking Windows Security, an hour of critical thinking on securing servers, workstations, and the Active Directory. Please join us for that. You will have a lot. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. I need to stop sharing my window. How do I do that? Here, 62. Oh, I'm sorry. That's something else. I forgot how to stop sharing my window. There we go. I think Andrew did it for me. Thank you, Andrew, for stop sharing my window. Now put everybody up three at a time. Can you do that, Andrew? Because it's just me on the screen. How do we get everybody together? There we go. That's all 3 of us. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into our discussion of hacking BYOD and unmanaged devices. I'm going to start, by the way, Curtis Simpson is the one with the giant microphone in front of him, and Jerry Archer from Sallie Mae over there sitting on the couch in the black turtleneck looking like Steve Jobs. All right, I throw this question out to both of you. What'd you say?
It's my future hope.
Your future hope. All right, excellent. All right, my very first question is, let's just define what constitutes an unmanaged device. I'll ask you, Jerry, first. An unmanaged device, what are we dealing with here?
I mean, to me, we're dealing with a whole new world, right? I mean, we always talk about the Internet of Things and all these unmanaged devices, but let's go to let's say what it really is. It's the Internet of everything. So when we start talking about unmanaged devices, we're talking about everything from refrigerators and washing machines to laptops to iPhones, you name it. It's the Internet of everything. So when we look at unmanaged devices and say the enterprise, we're talking about a whole host of things that exist in our enterprise that are now smart devices. And they have continually expanding compute capability and continually expanding action capability. So add to the fact that it's no longer just a simple software that's gathering data. These things are acting. And they can do really bad things to us if we're not careful in managing those devices. So my point is in this case, we're talking about everything from soup to nuts. And it exists in our customer endpoints. It exists in our enterprise. It exists in our automobiles and our airplanes and our trains and you name it. That's the Internet of everything. And that's and let's face it, there are billions, if not several billion, unmanaged devices that are sitting out there. And in our enterprise, there are a lot of devices that we are trying to get under control. Those assets are in our environment, and we have to figure out how to manage them. Frankly, as a bank, if we don't, the regulators will come down on us pretty hard.
By the way, good point. You mentioned the regulator issue too, as well, and we're going to get to all of that as well. Please get your questions in as quickly as possible. I want to throw this to you, Curtis. I'm assuming you agree with it, but I want to just know of what are we seeing today as opposed to a year ago, 2 to 3 years ago? Like, how has the change of unmanaged devices developed? Because we know it's expanding pretty quickly.
It is expanding pretty quickly. I think one of the good examples that I can provide is actually where I was previously located. So as global CISO of Cisco Foods, Cisco could previously be described as an IT and an OT organization separated by an air gap. That air gap is gone. That air gap no longer exists, and rather what is replaced it has been a number of integrations from an OT environment back to the IT environment, often through IoT. I went from an environment where approximately 5% of the devices could be deemed as unmanaged. Most of those actually fell within known functions within the enterprise. Fast forward to about a year and a half ago when I left the organization, more than 60% of the devices were unmanaged. The vast majority of those unmanaged devices were running alongside critical business functions, ranging from critical supply chain functions to refrigeration to you name it. The things that mattered most to the business were surrounded by devices that not only were little understood, but in many cases were being forced upon us. I think one of the important things to understand as we think about unmanaged devices, we're executing and enabling IoT type capabilities in our own environments for strategic purposes. Vendors are doing that within our environments as well. Everything from vending machines to safes to televisions are all connected to Jerry's point now. But they're running alongside everything that matters most. And really, if we think about managed versus unmanaged, it comes down to what we have visibility into and control over versus not. Mm-hmm. And the reality is the majority of our devices fall into the second category.
That's pretty bad. All right. I'm going to ask you, by the way, bring your levels down. Your levels are a little hot there. That's an excellent point. And this is, I think, the general fear. And that also falls under the classic line that we hear again and again and again, what you don't know, you can't manage. But to a degree, we can manage what we don't know. I mean, is that true, Jerry? I mean, is there a way to manage the unknown of these unmanageable devices?
Well, I think it starts with some form of detection, right? I mean, we have to have a capability to detect the device in order to get some control over it. I mean, if you look at where we're headed as a strategic direction, we're saying that, look, trying to manage mean time between failure, or if you will, in the cyber world, the idea of managing between breaches and keeping that as long as possible is going away. I think what we have to do is we have to start looking in the other direction, mean time to repair. So if I can detect very quickly and I can react very quickly and I can shut down whatever the problem is, right, I minimize the damage. And I think that's how you begin to manage what you don't know, right? Mm-hmm. You can manage it when you see it. So when it starts to act badly, right, if you can detect it very, very quickly and stop it, then maybe the damage is limited or completely eliminated. But that's the key, is trying to refocus. I'm not saying you eliminate the idea of looking mean time between failures, but I'm saying now you start to look at mean time to repair and trying to drive that down to zero. That to me seems the possible way of managing something that you don't know.
Let me ask this question that just came in from Eli Migdal, who's the CEO of Borders. I'm going to throw this one to you, Curtis. I'm going to tag in, by the way, Eli, I'm going to tag in something that my co-host Mike Johnson has said multiple times, in that he's always had a zero trust approach to connecting. And if you're starting with that philosophy, isn't the issue of BYOD and unmanaged devices, do they become moot? Or because this is the way you're looking at all devices, the ones that you know and you don't know? So essentially, Eli's asking the same question. What is the best way to connect the zero trust approach with BYOD? Isn't a full zero trust approach, doesn't really care if they are managed or not? I mean, what do you say to that, Curtis?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I apologize. I've got an echo of my own voice, so I'm going to try to talk over that.
Oh, and anyways, when you're done, just refresh your browser. That'll probably solve the problem.
Okay, cool. So as you think about this larger problem, one of the issues we face is that in large enterprise environments, these devices are flowing into the landscape, right? So if I look at the environment I came from with operations in Europe, you got operations in Latin America, you got operations in US, Canada, et cetera. They're all independently led and operated to an extent with independent strategies, independent budgets, and they're acting with some level of independence, including the purchase, implementation, and adoption of devices, and including the fact that these devices are being pushed into their environments by vendors. You have a device that was traditionally benign that has now been replaced with a connected device. So as we think about it from that perspective, one of the challenges is that these devices are flowing into our environments at an unprecedented rate. We can no longer take the stance where we have to assess a device, approve the device, allow it onto the network, because that just kills our political capital. In the environment I came from, the business was running at some of these challenges. And if I was going to slow them down by assessing a device, it wasn't going to work. So going back to the question, what does work is monitoring everything. So when you think about an unmanaged device, most of these devices can't take an agent, can't take software, can't take configurations, but we need to know they're there. We need to know what they're doing. And we need to take the approach that the moment they start going sideways, we're going to take an action. How I've done this in the past is I broke my environment into two key categories: critical and important, or not. So if a television that fell into the not category, for example, started acting differently, I would isolate it, contain it, and respond to the event. It had no critical impact to the business. I never really trusted it from the beginning. What I trusted was its behaviors against what I knew to be normal. When those behaviors went abnormal, we either triggered isolation or triggered a response. With millions or hundreds of thousands or millions of devices across these environments, I would argue we don't have much of a choice in terms of how we think about these larger complex landscapes, because we can't manage everything all the time, but we do need to understand when the business has all of a sudden gone sideways or activities have all of a sudden gone malicious.
All right. And by the way, go ahead and refresh your browser. By the way, this is a known bug in Crowdcast, the issue you're having. Let me throw it to you, Jerry, because I'm assuming this is something that you're dealing with, and that you're saying, there are all these devices out there, but now the proliferation of work from home is so strong. And I'm going to quote here a question from Phil Wolf, who, by the way, is starting an IoT business of his own. And workforce home spaces. How does managing work from home and BYOD alter the relationship between what an employer should have access to and the worker privacy? Has this changed at all now that we're in such a heavy work from home situation, Jerry?
Well, I think in our case, right, remember, we're a heavily regulated entity. So, I mean, that's a game changer for us, meaning that, the way we react to work from home and the way, say, non-regulated companies might react are entirely different.
Yeah, well,
so we
specifically, I'm very interested to heavy regulated, because you did bring this up at the very beginning of the show. So this is a good time to jump into it.
Yeah, I mean, in our case, right, we just can't send people home and say, log into your PC at home, and we're going to give you connections into our environment and into databases, which have very sensitive and private information about customers, right? So when we sent our workforce home back in March, we sent them home with thin clients. So our basic premise in our environment is everybody sits at home. All of our people at home basically have thin clients, and they come into our environment through a VDI connection, right? And so all the VDIs are running in servers, which are highly monitored and carefully controlled. So the way that our work from home environment, if you will, a security stack works is, for example, we don't allow printing except by, extreme exception. We don't allow USBs. We don't, we've cut off everything that is there. We demand, right, through policy, because that's the best you can hope for, that people have a private working environment. We mandate privacy screens to help stop shoulder surfing. I will tell you, we're looking at biometric authentication to make sure that the person sitting in front of the screen is who they say they are. And if I can, I'll find a way, and we're looking for ways to do continuous authentication. So, for example, I can make sure that the person sitting in front of the screen always is a person who authenticated themselves to the environment. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. But remember, we're highly regulated and forced to spend that kind of expenditure to make sure that those things are true and hold true throughout the entire environment, right? That's different, I think, for most companies.
Oh, yeah. What you're doing is extraordinary.
Right. If I had to deal with that in a less affluent company where they're not willing to spend that kind of resource, then I think there's a whole set of different problems that accrue from that. So fortunately, I don't have to do that. I'm a lucky CISO, right? I don't have to worry about those kinds of issues. So,
by the way, you are the second CISO I spoke to whose organization is just literally throwing money at security issues, which it seems like you have to, especially in your situation with the heavy regulations that you've got. And by the way, the other CISO I spoke to also in a heavily regulated industry. Let's go back to, by the way, everything you said is great, but as you said, you have all these other devices and you're in a heavily regulated industry. How are you uniquely, not referring to all the thin clients you have here, but for everything else that is attacking your network, or not attacking, connecting to your network, let's say it in the polite way, and then attacking may be happening, which I'm sure it is. How are you dealing with that, and what are the regulatory issues? What do you need to show to regulators that you're watching this unmanaged behavior?
Yeah, first of all, it's asset management, right? I mean, that's the fundamental. You first need to demonstrate that you're accurately cataloging, collecting all of the things that are touching your network. So I can't plug my companion here on the call or on the video here, but obviously we've employed a tool that that we're using in our environment to collect all of the devices that touch our network. And then once we start to do that, then we start to try and figure out how to manage them or exclude them from the environment, block them, whatever we need to do. Now we're also very aggressively using behavioral analytics, and we collect just about everything we can from the enterprise perspective around events. So I will tell you that, for example, we're now collecting well over 2 billion events a day that we feed into behavioral analytics and SIMS. Okay, so we're watching that environment, looking for any telltale of bad behavior. We also characterize normal behavior, or we do the best we can at characterizing reasonable normal behavior. Things outside of that realm immediately generate alerts and cause us to react in some way, shape, or form, either blocking or, in some cases, if it's a device, if it's a human device, or like a thin client, we call up the person on the phone and say, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" That kind of thing. But in other cases, we simply block.
All right. I'm going to take this to you, Curtis, in just a second, but I forgot to mention the link at the bottom of the screen is to join us for next Friday's video chat. Next Friday. Please join us for next Friday's video chat, which will be on hacking Windows security. Go ahead and click on that at any time. It will not take you out of this video chat at all. You can register for that video chat and still very much be in this one at the same time. I know you can multitask. All right. Here's the thing I want to take to you, Curtis, is I want to talk about that, essentially that artificial intelligence piece of anomalous behavior. What this, just to say we have AI means a lot of different things. So what is changing now in terms of unmanaged device behavior that you have to tune your AI to, you have to look to your AI to, you have to demand your AI can do this? Like, whomever you're working with, make sure their AI is doing this, and that is what aren't. I'm sorry, Curtis.
Yeah, very good question, David. And the echo problem is gone now, by the way. So
Good.
Really good question. As you think about this problem, it really comes down to the sheer number of these devices in the landscape today, right? So as we talk about all these different types of unmanaged devices, even if you just look at a tablet, the tablet isn't always just a tablet, right? A tablet could be used as a personal device that someone's traveling with and moving around with, whether it's within that facility or multiple facilities. A tablet could also be running a video conferencing room and has a totally different persona or set of behaviors associated with those devices. So as we think about this problem, and as I look to the market in regards to this problem, I also don't really think of this as much about AI, and I sooner think of this more so as a machine learning capability. right? And I think it's important to sometimes denote these things so we eliminate some of that ethereal magic that comes along with AI. But as you think about machine learning and what we do and what you ultimately have to do in this landscape, is we've got to continuous, or there has to be a capability that we're comparing our environment against. A capability must fundamentally understand the behaviors of devices that we can, right? So as you look at this problem, if you've got many thousands of different types of devices in your environment, or like I came from, thousands of unique types of devices within your environment, the challenge you're always going to face is you don't contextually understand what normal looks like. And what you don't want to do is contextually understand what normal looks like just in your environment, right? Because we all know the old adage of, if I establish normal based on my environment, what if normal includes compromised activity or compromised, right? So as we see that within our own landscape, we can't necessarily trust that. But what we can trust is a comparison of behaviors in our environment against a capability that's already been established around understanding and baselining unique behaviors of different types of devices. And not just the device, but how that device is being used. It's important that the capability is not just saying we found a tablet, but you want to know exactly what the tablet is. You want to know that it's powering a video conferencing room, therefore the behavior should look like this, typically do. And then you have the ability to identify when they don't. That's key. And as I think about AI, machine learning in this space, I really think it does come down to that. It's the contextual understanding of devices where we can rapidly compare our information against that overall knowledge base, database of that contextual understanding, and rapidly fingerprint exactly what we're talking about, exactly what's happening, and be able to investigate with the context that are.
So let's talk. Oh, before I say talk about the human component here, because I want to talk about that in a second. Oh, and although I just saw more questions came in, but our poll is up, our best bad idea poll, and so please start voting for your best bad idea. And by the way, I'm still working on trying to get cool sweatshirts. I still don't have them. I'm dealing with that. But the winner of the best bad idea, which I do not announce until next week, will get a cool CISO series sweatshirt. God willing, I can figure out how to get the darn thing, which has also been troublesome as well. Let me go to some of the questions right here. This is a good question from Paul Lanzi with Remediant. He asks, I'll throw this to you, Jerry. Is zero trust attainable on BYODs when your zero trust ecosystem requires the installation of multiple software agents?
Clearly, you can just try and establish some level of zero trust in the environment, but I mean, it comes down. I think we're back to the behavioral thing, right? I mean, I can't stop certain things from happening in the environment because they just do. Mm-hmm. The only thing that I could say is that it's what you don't know, and we're going to have to look at behavior as a way of deciding when something is appropriate or inappropriate. Mm-hmm. So I don't think you could segregate the networks. You can create artificial boundaries. I mean, like we separate all of production from non-production, from test, from corporate. So those are all firewalled off. So you can create some level of trust in the environment, or zero trust as it might be. But I don't think, given where we are with all of these devices that are hitting the world, that's really going to hold true. I mean, we can certainly do it with applications in production, and we can isolate those. But beyond that, I'm not sure that you can. I think it's going to continue to proliferate. And I think worse than that, I mean, it's going to hit our endpoints, right? I mean, at the end of the day, as I've been around this environment for, the internet world for years and years, from, Intuit to Bankers Trust and so forth, what you find is that ultimately, no matter how good we are at securing our enterprise environments, at the end of the day, the real issue is going to be endpoints. And that means customers. And so how do we begin to talk about security at a customer endpoint? And that's going to be, I think, the ultimate decider from how we regulate these environments. Is there zero trust in a customer environment? How do we isolate customers? What do we tell customers? Are we going to say, when a customer shows up at Sally Mae, if he doesn't have AV installed with latest signatures, we're going to say you can't come in? I mean, what are we going to do? I mean, these are the kind of things that we have to answer broadly. I mean, I would go back, the last point I will make is I'd go back to Dan Geer about 3 or 4 years ago when he stood up at Black Hat and talked about the 10 Commandments. And one of the things he said was basically all of these devices need to either be patchable, right? And it can either have a lifetime, and after that lifetime is gone, then the device simply quits working, right? It kills itself, or it's enabled, or patching can be enabled, where somebody, either the original manufacturer or some third party, could come in and patch vulnerabilities. But until you start doing something like that, I mean, what are our choices, right? We've got routers. We got literally millions and millions of routers that never get updated and are full of vulnerabilities. Where's the trust? I think we're past the point, right? I mean, this is a point of no return when you're looking at all of this environment. So sorry, it's a little long.
It's heard it. I want to take a question to you, Curtis. So Jerry spoke very, at great levels of the fact that they are creating extreme secure setups in their workers' homes with the thin clients. But talk to me about some companies that you're working with that are not as in heavily regulated industry, that have not taken all the steps, do not have the income. How this question comes from Idan Gore. In a work from home nowadays, do you try to better assess or upgrade the security of your workers' home network, so to the severe extreme like Jerry does, as it is kind of a new perimeter, perhaps allows a layer of defense? So I'm going to put Jerry pretty much at the high end here. What are layers below that are not nearly as costly that you're seeing some of your clients doing?
Yeah, there's a number of things there. So one is we've seen a lot of folks implement ZTNA or SASE capabilities, right? And where that becomes, I think, incredibly important is you start to worry less about the state of a device and worry more about the fact that you've got those activities coming to and from that device being brokered by something, right? So I think that's one very much significant approach that people can take that has one immediate or it drastically reduces that corresponding risk. But there's another thing that I'll offer is in environments where folks are challenged with this overall unmanaged device problem, they're actually using those same capabilities to solve some of these problems at home, because many of the capabilities have extended themselves into the home by no longer just integrating with networks, but actually integrating with choke points, right? Whether those VPN or the ZTNA or SASE capabilities that I just spoke to, the existing endpoint agents that are already installed on those devices. We have the opportunity now to truly have a single pane of glass view, as far as you can get with that, into all of the different devices, whether they're at home or in our environment, the state that they're in, etc., based upon what we already have, and just integrating what we already have back into modern platforms that understand the contextual use of these devices, what normal looks like, etc. So we can very much, there's multiple approaches to this today. There's multiple ways of tackling this. And again, you can either do this with things you've already got while also bolstering those capabilities with, again, closing some of those gaps that we've got around a contextual.
Whoops, I lost whatever last thing you said, Curtis. I lost your audio. You still there?
Still here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Say the last few words you just said. What did you just say? Last few words?
I don't remember. It's okay.
It's all right. We got Dutch on for a comment or question. By the way, Dutch will be coming back on to give your challenge and so what's worse. Dutch, go ahead. What's your question or comment here?
Yeah, my question is, maybe Curtis, Jerry, if you could go first, then maybe Curtis, you could go second. But what lessons can you learn if you're in a not managed, highly regulated environment like yours? So, I mean, I think there's a percentage of us who have that kind of a background, but what lessons can you apply when you can't sort of have that forcing function of highly regulated, where the board and the C-level are arguably kind of tuned into that need? How do you do that if you're a regular medium-sized business? What lessons could you impart to them?
Yeah, I think that the only thing that I can say, and I think it's true of the regulated as well as unregulated industry, security at the end of the day starts at the top, right? I mean, you've got to have buy-in from the CEO, the CFO, and those people, and it has to filter down to the staff, meaning they have to really mean what they say. And right. I think I saw something pop up where the CEO has a Mac, and we shouldn't regulate the CEO's Mac because he really loves Macs and stuff like that, right? I mean, if you don't have that kind of support, then you've got a problem. And I think that's probably how you deal with security when you don't have a highly regulated environment that demands a certain kind of regime, right? Meaning it's more policy based than it is physically based, because you're not going to spend the resources, you may not have those resources to spend on certain things. So it has to be more policy and governance based. I think at the end of the day, we as a global thing, we're going to have to come to some conclusion around how software is written, how it's tested, and what happens when people don't follow a reasonable set of rules, what sanctions can apply to those people. And I don't mean to tail off into something different. I don't know any other course. We need to find some way to get to a point where when software is produced and distributed to millions of people, there's some level of assurance, like a UL lab or something that says this works. I'm not suggesting that the federal government or anybody needs to get involved in all of this, but there has to be some set of standards that people should follow. And if they don't, there's some set of sanctions that go along with that. And that's the only way I see that we end up
governing body, but it was sort of,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
If there was a governing body, but it was voluntary to sort of with the UL idea to sort of certify that. Do you think that would work?
Well, look, I mean, we already have certain kinds of things that exist. For example, we have certs. The certs are vertically integrated. They understand the industry that they're in. We have universities with great researchers, and we could take the certs and empower the certs with, extraordinarily professional people aligned in vertical industries, aligned with research at universities. We could create the best practice. Not only that, but the cert could then be a feedback into that says, here's what happened. So my analogy to this is a fire department where you essentially have fire codes. I mean, think about it. We started out in the world, we had great fires. When we had great fires in big cities, then what happened is we developed fire codes. And we could do the same in the certs. We could leverage the certs, empower them differently, create a governance model that essentially establishes what would be equivalent of UL standards or fire codes, and then have some set of sanctions, ultimately rational sanctions, if that's possible, from our government, that would, if you didn't follow the fire codes or the cyber codes, then you could suffer some sanction if the building catches on fire or you get breached, right? I mean, those are the kind of things that we need to have. I don't know any other way to get over these hurdles. I'm open to ideas, but to me, we just need better governance in this environment.
All right, let's take this. I know, Judge, you wanted Curtis's response to this too. Curtis, a quick response here, and then we need to get to our first game.
You bet.
Go ahead.
So I agree with everything Jerry just stated, but I think we would all agree that that's a relatively long road, right? Yes. So to give you a different answer, having been a global CISO in an unregulated environment, who was more concerned about availability than anything else. I mention that because I think success comes from aligning to what the business cares about most. So as I implemented a program that needed to better understand exactly what was happening in our OT environments, such that I could manage the risk in the environments, the conversation I needed to have was how I could no longer provide assurance around availability. And the concern that I had was because of my lack of visibility into things like impacts to refrigeration, critical supply chain, et cetera, I could not help the business remain available and recover in minutes to hours. Rather, that turned into recovery in days to weeks. And I could no longer, again, provide the assurance I can keep the business up and running. I give that example because I think in many cases, our success in unregulated environments comes more so from understanding critical business strategy, critical business operations, and those corresponding services and solutions, and the underlying risks that are about to disrupt or that are standing in the wind or in the wings waiting to disrupt them. And we've got to be transparent with the business as to what we've got to do to manage that. And most of our business functions have challenges they need help with. One of the things I found most effective over the years, like when I initially reached out to the OT environment and started partnering with them, was just try to understand what technology problems they're facing. I hate to say this, but in many cases, they've been struggling with their IT partners to deliver on some of those things because they've been working on larger problems. If we can help them solve smaller problems with the same tech that we're deploying to understand and manage risk, great. The door is probably going to be open for us to do that. And the money will probably be there for helping that business reduce cost, increase efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. It's a far less friction-based model than typical.
Excellent point. All right, we have a call that just came in.
Hello, welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
All right, you guys know what this means. We are going to now play the Department of Yes. bad ideas have been submitted. They're bad. You're not going to like them, but being that you're with the Department of Yes, you have to agree to them and explain why you want to do it without being facetious. All right. It appears that one member, and actually others agree with him because this is the most voted up bad idea so far, do not believe that Apple and Google's marketing about inherent security is valid. So, but this is the idea that they want. Believing, so this is what, Curtis, I'm going to you first. Believing that Apple and Google's marketing about the inherent security and lack of vulnerability of their devices. Excuse me, Apple and Google's marketing about the inherent security and lack of, excuse me, now I'm reading it correctly. All right. So the Department of Yes, you have to fully believe Apple and Google's marketing that they say they have inherent security and they have lack of vulnerability in devices. What say you? How do you go forward? If you do that, I'm assuming you would just sort of, you drop the wall. What would you do in such a situation, Curtis?
I guess the answer to that is I completely trust the state of those devices because I've got a laundry list of risks that I've got to focus on, and I've got a heck of a lot of vendors that I have zero visibility into. I don't even know what they look like, who they are, who's on that team. And when I asked them who I could speak to within their PCERT organization, they said, PCERT what? So as I think about it, it allows me to shorten that list of my focus areas in terms of what I need to, or where I need to manage risk.
I'll give that's a good answer right there. Jerry, what if you're putting full, you've taken, by the way, being in a heavily regulated industry, you said Apple and Google, all right, we fully trust you. We're putting you to the side. Why are you doing that?
Oh, well, it's really simple. What we're going to do is we're going to run a stump grinder and take every PC and Windows device that we have, and we're going to throw it into the stump grinder and grind it all up and tell everybody that we clearly think that you should move to Apple and Google and buy everything that they offer up because it's such a good thing. And it doesn't have any vulnerabilities, and therefore cybercrime is out of business, and we're all safe, sound, and regulated.
All right. Well, a little on the facetious side, so got to pull back.
That was a grand idea. Come on.
It's great. I do like the idea, though, of fully moving all devices over there. But all right. I got one more for you here. This is, to a degree, what you're doing already, Jerry. Bring all the devices in your workforce's homes. So you're not, this is more than just your thin clients that you've put in your homes, but now all devices in your home, their smart TV, every cell phone, everything else, all of those devices are now going to become under Sally Mae management, your company's management. Why is this a good idea? Hold on, wait, you're on mute.
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry. I said because my budget would increase by 200%. I'm sorry, that was facetious, wasn't it?
So why do you want to actually bring all the workforce's home, all the devices in your workforce's home under management?
Yeah, I mean, if the worst bad idea in the world would be us trying to grapple with all of these devices in the environment rather than trying to isolate our own. And I mean, so if we had to do that, right, then clearly you could have more of a trusted environment, but at the same time, the resource requirement, not facetiously, would go through the roof. And the ability to keep track of everything in someone's home where they have the independent ability to bring into that perimeter anything they want would be extraordinarily difficult. But I mean, if we can do that, if we can manage that, then clearly we could build a trusted environment in everybody's home. But the resource requirements would probably be incredibly excessive.
But I should also mention, if you do that, you don't have to bring in all the thin clients, right?
Well, that's true, but we already have all of our thin clients. So,
assuming you didn't, Curtis, I'm throwing this to you. By the way, I'm going to give you I gave them both to you. Here you go, Curtis. How are you going to answer this? All devices in the workforce's home is under management. Why are you doing this?
I have full control and visibility over everything. I understand everything that's connecting into our environment. I understand what our users are using at home. I understand what risks they're putting themselves into. I understand what risks they're putting the business into, and I can manage all of it.
Simple as that, of course.
But the hell with privacy, right?
You don't need privacy. All right, good job, Curtis. Very good job. Okay, by the way, I'm going to give a heads up to Dutch. I've not received anything from you, but that's okay. Dutch, if you just pick your two comparisons, not the two I just mentioned, for the What's Worth face-off, we're going to bring you on in just a few minutes for that. But I'm going to go to some of our questions that have come in. And there was one here. Oh, this one is interesting. And I'm going to throw this to you first, Curtis. This is from Davina Cooper, who says, new software is developed every day for BYOD. Is AI intelligent enough to fingerprint software code for vulnerabilities? I think the current system relies on the hardware vendors' researchers to identify vulnerabilities. Heck, I'm going to say this, Davina. Yes, of course. It'd be wonderful if all the hardware went out there with no vulnerabilities. But that's not the case. They're out there and they got the vulnerabilities. So what about software? To what level, let me ask, to what level can the software be intelligent enough to see vulnerabilities, and what level they're just never going to have visibility? Curtis.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we very much can see with today's technology, as we think about devices and behaviors of those devices and how they communicate over networks, we can very much see and understand both the software that exists on those devices and whether that software is acting differently, whether it's acting maliciously, whether it's acting anonymously, et cetera. And a lot of that comes back to the fact that almost everything is communicating in some capacity over a network now, right? So we're not talking about these walled off gardens that sit within our own environments. In most cases, we're talking about devices communicating over the internet, over networks back to the internet. And with that visibility and that understanding, we can see not only, again, what software is there, but all of the different components within the device and whether or not they're vulnerable. I think a great example is if we look at recent disclosures in the last 2 years around Urgent 11 and Ripple 20, those exposures sit within the TCP/IP library, or the TCP/IP library within IoT devices and a number of different billions of different devices around the world. The reality is we can see that software is running. We can see that it's vulnerable. We can understand why it's vulnerable based upon how these devices are communicating. Devices are very verbose in terms of the metadata that's being thrown across the network as they're communicating, and taking that information and comparing it against something that, as we talked about earlier, already understands what normal looks like, truly allows us to not only understand the software, but start to get a better understanding of whether or not something malicious, abnormal, or something of concern is playing out there.
By the way, look at this is an interesting question from Matthew Bibby, who's also a CISO himself. And he said, I once heard a CISO say that they allow any device in connection and are only ultimately concerned with and monitor egress activity. Let me just ask you that again. Philosophy, could you pull that off? Just accept all and just worry about the activity? How dangerous a behavior is that, Curtis?
We're already doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So I think it's important to note that as we talk. So as we go in, and I just talked to a customer yesterday that said, I knew I had at least 30,000 devices in my environment. I expected to see approximately 50,000 when I deployed a visibility capability. What I had was 150,000 devices in my environment, 3 times what I thought. Right. So we're doing it today. I think the difference is if we look at these types of devices, I break them into different categories. We know what our standards need to be on our employee endpoints. Don't stop applying those standards. Why would we stop that? That's been successful primarily up to this point. We need to continue to do those things because those are multi-use devices. Those standards exist for a reason. But I'll be honest, I was that CISO as well. When I look at all of the sheer amount of IoT devices flowing into my environment, was I supposed to tell the business, stop? I need to take someone who doesn't necessarily understand all the components of these IoT devices. I need them to assess them, waste your time, potentially days, weeks, et cetera, and then come back to you with a risk assessment that's probably always going to be reasonably good because we don't necessarily have the information or the knowledge we need to dig into this device. So as you think about it differently, I would argue that this is the reality of what we're facing now. In most cases, now, I would argue that the best approach is deploy within a lab, continuously assess within the lab, and then make decisions based upon the results that we're getting out of that lab, and then go forward with production implementations. But I think gone are the days where we could assess everything, worry about deploying agents to everything because they don't apply. We're going to have a level of freedom in our environment, which is where I go back to. I think the most important thing today is we've got to know what's in our networks. We have to monitor our networks. And then from that zero trust perspective, we have to respond to changes in behaviors. We can't control everything.
And this goes back, Jerry, to your comment about the speed of response. So how again, this comment that Matthew said, again, it wasn't him, it was another CISO that he heard. And again, Curtis makes the point of like, well, a lot of us are doing this already. And a lot of have just sort of accepted this as I'm no longer protecting my environment. I'm just responding to it. That's my protection, my speed of response. And we've talked a lot on our shows before about the number one statistic to measure is dwell time, the time between detection and remediation, or those times. So, in a regulated environment, can you think like that, or no? You can no way can you think like that.
Well, look, I mean, we've talked about this idea that you want mean time to repair to shrink to zero, right? I mean, you want to drive to zero. It doesn't mean you give up on mean time between failure, right? It doesn't mean you give up on the idea of setting standards and trying to enforce it. I agree that you're not going to be 100% successful, but at the same time, you shouldn't give up. And I think the idea of continually driving down zero time to repair. Look, the technology is now coming out. You're seeing it from vendors. It's called, we're using SOAR technology, right? Mm-hmm. We're doing automated response. So when we see something, at least in certain classes of abnormal behavior, when we see that happen, we immediately block, and we block out of the abundance of caution. We don't block because, as a first rule to say we might impair the business. We block out of an abundance of caution, and then if the block was wrong, meaning that we impaired something in the business, we can correct that. But you have to err on the side of quick response versus, let's go check and see if the CFO really meant to send out all of our financial data to his Gmail account or to his Russian email friend, today. You err on the side of blocking, then you worry about what you blocked and when you do it. I call it the big red easy button. You hit it and you stop, right? I mean, you shut it down quickly.
All right. Oh, wait, something just came in.
It's time to play What's Worse?
All right, Dutch. First of all, you got to move the camera so we can get a full shot of that T-shirt. There's a lot of comments about this shirt. That is a unicorn riding a dinosaur. Are we reading that correctly?
Yeah, it's very meta. Yeah, the unicorn riding the T-Rex.
There you go. Awesome. All right. So for those of you who've never played before, I'm going to just set this up, and then Dutch is going to throw the two what's worse scenarios out to both Jerry and to Curtis. The way it works is two bad ideas, of which you guys have submitted them. Dutch, our winner from last week, has chosen the two. What you have to do is determine which of these horrible two ideas is worse, which would cause more damage. All right. So go for it. Dutch, what are the two bad ideas in this what's worse scenario?
Awesome. Curtis, we'll start with you. So here are the two ideas, right? Option one is skip step one. And by that, they mean skip doing any kind of asset inventory whatsoever versus use the same password for everything.
Which one is worse? Okay, go for it. Worse?
Skip asset inventory. Or sorry, use the same password for everything is worse.
Why is it worse, and why do you think the more damage from that?
Because if we don't know what we have, yet we're applying those same passwords to everything that we're deploying, everything can ultimately be compromised unbeknownst to us through the password. You get one or the other.
So you would know everything you have, but you're applying the passwords to everything, or you don't know what you have, but you have great password management, or
okay, fair enough.
So you don't trust me. The best or what's worse is one or the other. It's not both at the same time.
Gotcha. So no asset inventory is what I'll say, because you could apply compensating controls to the password scenario.
Okay, good answer. Right. All right. To you, Jerry, which one is worse?
No, I take the other direction. I think it's worse to have the same password.
So you'll be okay with no asset inventory?
But in comparison. I think I'd be better off. I see too many people try to use Spring 2020 as a password. We've never yet done a pen test where we don't have people using dumb passwords. So setting a single password to everything gives hackers an open invitation to take everything you own.
Awesome. All right.
Love it.
That is excellent answer, both you. Dutch, thank you very much for the what's worse scenarios here. Jerry, Curtis, by the way, excellent answers on both of them. I'm going to give you kudos for that. We are exactly 10 minutes out. I'm going to remind people now again about our the link at the bottom of the screen. If you have not registered for next week's video chat, please do that. We'd love to have you for there as well. The topic will be hacking Windows security. As a reminder, clicking on that will not take you out of this video chat. And I should also mention some password comment for the password comment. That's if you win, Diane. What was going to say is that link at the bottom is going to change to our icebreaker, which is going to be later. So I'm going to throw one question at you now, and then we're going to do a wrap-up question as well. So what was the question that I had here? Oh, no, we asked this one. No, that one was asked here. This question came in from John, and it's upvoted here. John asked, and I don't know which John this is, Jon John. What prevents you from, please speak up if it's you, what prevents you from treating your internal network as hostile, which, by the way, I know some CISOs do because they have that sort of zero trust attitude, i.e. assume every workstation is connected to the public internet, limit access to sensitive data to those devices you manage, and ignore the unmanaged stuff. Why can't we do this? So flat out block all unmanaged, if I'm following you directly, John, and then put severe access on the stuff you manage. Is that even feasible to control business that way? I'll ask you, Jerry.
Yes, we do that today.
You do.
So every single resource and every single application uses mutually authenticated TLS to move between the two. If you're not prior authenticated, you don't get access. Secondly, we use software-defined perimeter. So you have to have pre-authentication in order to even see our environment. So if you can't even ping it. It doesn't exist. It's a black hole, right? So it's there. So that's one of the things that we did when we moved to the cloud is we created a security stack that fundamentally started out with SDP, software-defined perimeter. And then we looked at how we encrypt everything everywhere all the time. Mm-hmm. And so everything is encrypted. We manage the keys. We use mutually authenticated TLS to move things between environments. So the only time it's decrypted is when the application has to process it. Now, the neat thing that I think is happening in the world is you'll see, I think both all of the major cloud providers are now coming up with hardware-based secure computing environments. I'll throw out Nitro as the one that I know because that's just one that we've seen already. But I think there are others where now the decryption occurs in the hardware and in the middle of processing. Mm-hmm. So we're taking away that ability. So I think that's the future, in at least near term, as to how you can solve for that problem of you don't get it unless you're entitled to it. And by the way, one of the biggest things that we did when we implemented this was our identity and access management group expanded significantly, because that's the real key issue is assigning that access to individuals and applications and everything. So nothing gets in our environment that's not pre-authenticated, essentially. Let
me ask, prior to you doing this, think about what your security situation was before you did the big cloud move. What has, and actually, by the way, you answered one part of it saying that you hired significantly for your identity access management. What has your security program or your maturity looked like now as compared to previously? Like, what has been the biggest leap in security program maturity, Jerry?
Yeah, I think transparency in the environment. Security, if you think about the cloud, I think most of the big cloud providers built in security from the beginning, meaning that they knew that was going to be a fundamental requirement for anybody moving to the cloud. Certainly for regulated industries, that's the only way you would ever get there. So if you look at our distributed environment prior to moving to the cloud, there's no way I could implement the level of transparency that we have now in the cloud back in a distributed environment at any reasonable cost. I mean, think about it. We're at 2 billion events a day that come out of our cloud environments that we now shove into both behavioral analytics and into our SIMs. You had nowhere close to that in the distributed environment. That level of transparency is incredible. The other thing that we've been able to do is we have now real-time compliance tools. So tools that overlook the environment, and if anything changes in the environment, it'll either alert it and force it back to its original state, or at least it alerts us and allows us to take actions. We no longer have to worry about the idea of patching things in production, right? Now what you do is you can build the next version of your code, and you simply switch from what was pre-prod to prod and tear down the old prod and start all over again. So therefore, you don't start constant changing in production environments. And that whole idea that the cloud enabled because of the inexpensive nature of standing up multiple instances is incredible. So I think that level, cloud fundamentally by orders of magnitude changed security for the better. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody's embraced that yet, but the opportunities there exist. And I think that's incredible.
All right. Hold on, Jerry. We have just 5 minutes left. Curtis, I want you to have little time, just 1 minute max, to answer the question regarding what John said about what if just say no to everything else. With your other clients, I mean, Jerry said he's very successful doing. How are they managing that?
So you can do that, but you have to reestablish your baseline, right? And what I mean by that is most companies no longer understand the devices that are either directly or indirectly in support of their key business services, solutions, et cetera. So you can do that, but I go back to what we talked about earlier. You've got to start with a position of visibility. You've got to reestablish and re-understand what your baseline of devices and capabilities looks like. And then you can start defining that unmanaged devices are now going to be blocked. The problem is if you were to define that today and say if it's unmanaged, it's not allowed, you're going to shut down business operations because you don't really know what unmanaged devices you have. And many of those are actually key to operations today.
All right. We're going to do a quick wrap up right here. And I'm going to let you guys have final comments on this. What I want to remind everybody is next week is Hacking Windows Security. Click that link right now because it's about to change. An hour of critical thinking on securing servers, workstations, and Active Directory. Now, also, stick around for our icebreaker. That link at the bottom is about to change to that. In fact, go ahead and do it right now, Andrew. You click on that link and you join it. You can click on it now. It's totally fine. Click on it now. It'll open up another window. Just type in your first name. You'll have to register with a Google account for that as well. I want to thank our sponsor, Armis. Thank you very much, Armis, for sponsoring this video chat. This was a really good discussion. And by the way, I got to greatly thank our two guests on doing just that. And I'll let you have final comments. By the way, if you want to sponsor a video chat, why not just email me at david@cisoseries.com. All right, let's get back to our discussion. We have exactly 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to give you a minute each. Jerry, your final advice on this very topic, what do you suggest?
I think we no longer live in an isolated world. There are no walls. Geography doesn't matter, and it's the universe of the internet now and cyber. And I think the only way to fix these problems long haul is to begin to look at what we were talking about, better governance models, and the idea of some sort of universal set of standards that apply to everybody who's writing and deploying software into these environments. Mm-hmm. One other thing that I would say that I think is probably a key to solving some of the problems that we have today is disaggregation. Mm-hmm. I believe that Berners-Lee is now working on this idea of pods where we all take our personal information and store it in our own personal pod, only give up that information when it's necessary and only on a temporary basis. The idea of getting rid of massive databases with a lot of information that's personally identifiable would make cybercrime simply go away. It now would resort to basically mugging, right? A single individual, which makes cybercrime completely unmonetarily useful, right? Which it would change the game at all. But those two things, standards and disaggregation, could change the world. I think we all should start thinking about how those would apply.
All right. Less than a minute for you, Curtis. Quick, what's your summary?
Start with visibility. We can't manage risk around everything. We have to prioritize our efforts around what matters most to our business. So start with critical business services, critical business solutions, critical business strategies, and work backwards from there with an understanding of what is most challenging them from a risk perspective. And that's got to be our focus. Excellent point.
All right. Click the link at the bottom of the screen. Join us for the icebreaker. If you've never done this before, it's a ton of fun. You can do it right now. Let me just quickly thank my guests. Jerry Archer, who's the SVP CSO for Sallie Mae. As we've discovered, highly regulated. But we all knew that beforehand. But we found out what he did, which is quite impressive what you've done, Jerry. So thank you very much for that. Also, Curtis Simpson, the CISO for Armis as well. And a huge thanks to Armis for sponsoring this video chat. Remember, if you want to sponsor, just ping me, david@CISOseries.com. That's it. Thank you to my producer, Andrew. Thank you, everybody else in the chat room. Dutch Schwartz, our winner from last year. Who will be the winner next week? Or from this week? We'll find out next week. Thank you. Take us out, Andrew.